So today we're just going to discuss this question. Was Adam a real person? Does it matter? And how do we fit it with modern science? That's the topic. And you can see I've got three main sections. Number one, the Bible portrays Adam as a real historical person. Secondly, a real historical Adam is theologically important. And then thirdly, a real historical Adam is scientifically plausible. And I think that's the right way around for a Christian, that we want to see what does the Bible say first. We aren't unconcerned with fitting it in with modern science. It's worth thinking about how does this fit with biology and with the fossils and everything else. But we want to get truth first of all from the Bible, and then we think about how it fits. And the Bible, I think, is pretty clear that Adam is a real historical person. So let me take you through some of the arguments. Firstly, Genesis 2 verse 5 to Genesis 5 verse 5, those are the verses that describe Adam and Eve and his life. They're part of a historical narrative. Now, this is to grant that the Bible does contain different kinds of literature. So it does contain visions, as we've been looking, some of us, at the book of Revelation. And I've been suggesting in Revelation that when Jesus is described as a lamb, that is a metaphor. Jesus is not physically a lamb, but symbolically he's a lamb because he's a sacrifice for the sins of the world. Similarly, the dragon, I'm going to argue in Revelation, is not an actual dragon, but is a picture of our spiritual enemy. So the Bible does contain metaphors, and there are poems and there's imagery. And you might think, well, actually, even the Hebrew word Adam, it means just man. The same word. This guy has got a kind of curious first name. His name just means man. What's your name? I'm man. And so maybe that leads some people to think, well, could he be just a sort of symbolic man? He stands for all humanity. Maybe he's just a metaphorical figure. Except that this particular individual whose name is man, his name is Adam, he comes as part of a historical narrative. It's describing events, and there's no obvious break between the end of the Adam story and the Noah story, and then the Abraham story, the Isaac story, the Jacob story, then into Exodus, the Exodus story, and then all the way through the rest of the Old Testament narrative. It's written as part of the same history. Second argument, Adam appears in genealogies with other historical people. So I've given you 4 different genealogies in the Bible that refer to Adam. So the first one is in Genesis itself. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, in his image, and named him Seth. When Seth had lived 105 years, he fathered Enosh. When Enosh had lived 90 years, he fathered Kenan, and then a few other gaps in between. And then Noah fathered Shem. Shem fathered, I can't say this guy's name, Arpachshad. A few generations in between. Then Terah fathered Abram, who later becomes called Abraham. So if Adam is just a metaphor, then is Abraham a metaphor? Is Abraham a metaphor? Or the rest of the children of Israel a metaphor? You know, that these are real people. Moses is a real person, and you trace it back. They're part of the same genealogy. That's Genesis itself. 1 Chronicles begins with a genealogy, Adam, Seth, Enosh, and goes right the way through the history of Israel. Luke, it's a genealogy in reverse. So it starts at the bottom. Jesus, when he began his ministry, was about 30 years of age, being the son, as it was supposed, because of course it was a virgin birth, but the son, the heir of Joseph. Joseph was the son of Heli, and then so on, all the way through all of these characters in the Old Testament until we get to Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. So was Jesus a historical person? Well, of course he was, and he's in a genealogy, Joseph, all the way through back to Adam. And then Jude, just as a throwaway line in the book of Jude, Enoch, the 7th from Adam. The Bible doesn't really think it's a big deal. It's not thinking it's controversial. It just assumes that this is a real person, a historical person. That's how it's portrayed. The genre is historical. The Bible thinks that he really lived. But secondly, it's not just that is the fact, but it's an important fact. A real historical Adam is theologically important. A lot rests on it that he's a real person. And the first thing is that all we looked at in Bitesize Theology last week, and this is a little plug for it. If you haven't seen it, you can find it on the Facebook page. I think you can find it on our website, and it's really recommended. Andrew Latimer was showing us the significance of being created in God's image, that there is something special and something different about human beings. And it's not just because of things that we're able to do. You know, we have better language than other animals, or we're more creative than other animals, or we're more intelligent than other animals. It's not just about our function, it's about our very ontology, about our very being. We have this dignity being created in the likeness of God. And that dignity in the Bible, it comes through our connection to Adam. The first man was made in God's image. And we inherit that image from him because we inherit our humanity from him. So you might ask, what is your species? I've got a dog. He's a Cocker Spaniel. He's just sniffing under my table right now. He's a dog because he was born from parents who were both dogs. I'm a human being because I was born from parents who were human beings. And their parents were human beings, and their parents are human beings. And we trace back, and my very essence as a human being comes from my parentage and traces all the way back to a person that God told us was made in his image. And the specialness of humanity, as distinct from the animals, traces back to Adam. So if you start messing with Adam, you're in danger of messing with the essence of what a human being is. You're going to mess about with the doctrine of our creation. But not only are you going to cause problems for creation, you're also going to cause problems for the fall, the place where sin and death enters the world in Genesis chapter 3, which will be coming to soon in our grace groups. Adam is the one through whom sin and death entered the world. If we remove this step, then God made something bad. And this is really crucial, because just as the creation of mankind is a particular intervention of God in the history of the world, there were animals, but then God did something special to make the first human being. So the fall of human beings, sin and death entering the world, was a fundamental turning point in the history of the world. Let me show you this in Romans 5. Therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned. A few verses later, death reigned from Adam to Moses. There's another assumption that Adam's a real human being. But death came into the world through this one man. Sin and then death. We get the same narrative in 1 Timothy. I do not permit a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man. Rather, she's to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived. The woman was deceived and became a transgressor. So it's talking about the fall in Genesis chapter 3 as a real historical event involving these real historical people, of whom Adam was made and then Eve was made. I know that verse opens up a whole other can of worms about men and women and how we relate to each other. And that you can take as a trailer for next week's Bitesize Theology on male and female. So do come back. But for now, I just want to notice that 1 Timothy assumes real human individuals, two historical individuals, and a real fall, when Eve was deceived and then Adam was deceived, and then sin entered the world, and then death entered the world. Now, if we remove that step, let's say, for example, as some people have tried to argue, that maybe there was a whole species already of Homo sapiens. There were these evolved human beings who populated the earth, and then God just picked one of them and decided to begin a relationship with him and to reveal himself to him. So of these kind of ape-like animals, God took one human Homo sapien and then said, Adam, hi, my name's God. I'm your creator. Let's start a relationship. If you just had that, then where does corruption enter in? This particular guy makes a bad decision involving eating of a tree that he's told not to eat of. But how does that now spread to everybody else, unless God starts just sort of punishing other people for what this one guy's done? There's no sort of connection intrinsically between Adam and the rest of his race. The way the Bible sees it is we inherit a problem from our first ancestor. He makes a false step, disobeys God, and from him we all inherit disobedience. He makes a false step and forfeits eternal life. He becomes mortal. Death enters the world. And so everyone who's born in his family after that becomes mortal. And this is the crucial thing, our mortality and our sin is traceable back to him. Now, if you remove that step, if you don't have an individual, a real human individual, then you don't have a real individual fool. And that means that God has made something bad, because all the problems in the world are part of the way that God's made us as a species. Whereas the Bible insists God made a good world. He made humanity and it was very good, Genesis chapter 1, and then something went wrong. This decision of this man was the origin of sin. And it protects God as a good creator, and it highlights the problem of sin as being a human problem. Adam is the one through whom sin and death enters the world. If we don't have a real human being, how does everyone become mortal? You end up saying, well, we already kind of were mortal, because through a whole process of evolution from apes, lots of generations died, and then you get more generations. The Bible says, no, there was no human death until this man made this mistake, and then death entered the world. So you can see already it's starting to be quite serious. We're first of all jeopardizing the doctrine of creation, and then we're jeopardizing the doctrine of the fall. I mean, these are two of the major turning points in the Bible. The next big turning point in the Bible is the doctrine of salvation. And sure enough, we end up jeopardizing that as well. So you jeopardize creation and fall and redemption. Because, point 3, Adam is a type. That's the Greek word for a pattern or a shape of Jesus, the covenant representative of a whole race. And these are two amazing passages where the Apostle Paul draws a parallel between Jesus and Adam. And he says in both cases, they are individuals who affect a whole load of other people, a whole race of people. And when we were doing Bitesize on Black Lives Matter last term, I was struck by the way that we used the term race entirely wrongly, because there's actually only two races of people. There is the race of Adam and there is the race of Christ. There's different ethnicities, and obviously that's a real issue, and we need to think about it, but we're wrong to call them races. It's just a misunderstanding. God has made the human race in Adam, and then God makes the Christian race in the new Adam, in Jesus. And the Bible sets up a parallel between how we related to our first ancestor, Adam, and how we relate to our new head, Christ. And I've highlighted the word one man, or in the original, it's just the one. But there's this real emphasis that what one does affects what happens to many. And sometimes the one refers to Adam, and sometimes the one refers to Jesus. And we're told at the beginning, Adam was a type, a pattern of the one who was to come. Let me read it. The free gift is not like the trespass, for if many died through the one's trespass, in other words, Adam's mistake, Adam's fall, Adam's disobedience to God, caused all of the human race after him to be mortal, to die. He was the ultimate super spreader, you might say. We were all very healthy before him. If many died through the one man's trespass, much more have the grace of God and the free gift by the grace of that one man, Jesus Christ, abounded for the many. And the free gift is not like the result of the sin of the one, For the judgment following one trespass brought condemnation, but the free gift following many trespasses brought justification. If because of one man's trespass, death reigned through that one man, much more will those who receive the abundance of grace and the free gift of righteousness reign in life through the one man, Jesus Christ. And then here comes the summary. Therefore, as one trespass led to condemnation for all men, so one act of righteousness leads to justification and life for all men. For as by the one man's disobedience, the many were made sinners, so by the one man's obedience, the many will be made righteous. Now, you see what's going on. There's a parallel here. Adam did something terrible and it wrecked the whole world. We all became sinners who die. And Jesus did something wonderful. He died on the cross as a righteous one so that we could be justified. And that led to justification and life. And there's this parallel. And we relate to Jesus as a single individual, the same as we relate to Adam as a single individual. If Adam isn't a real single individual, the whole argument breaks down. How do you get this connection with one person's act that causes us to die? Well, Paul says the same way as we have this connection to this one person's act, his death on the cross, his resurrection, that causes us to live. That's Romans 5. And there's another passage, and I love these passages very, very much. They're particularly precious to me. They're quite hard to understand, though, but all I want you to notice is just the parallel again between our relationship to Adam and our relationship to Jesus. And you see if you can tell which one of them I'm referring to as I read each half of a verse. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Just to understand this correctly, he's talking about the resurrection from the dead. He says we're raised with a spiritual body. Spiritual does not mean non-physical. It doesn't mean kind of floaty and cloud-like and not quite real. Spiritual means empowered by the Spirit. And Jesus' body was very physical and real. It was just physical and real and empowered by the Spirit. That's what we're talking about. So if there is a natural body, like this one that I've got here, there is also a spiritual body like the one that Jesus had at his resurrection. Thus it's written, the first man, Adam, became a living being. Quote from Genesis. The last Adam, who's that? Well, that's the way of talking about Jesus. Jesus is a second Adam or a last Adam. The second Adam became, or the last Adam became a life-giving spirit. It's not the spiritual that comes first, but the natural, and then the spiritual. In other words, Adam was around on the earth before Jesus was around on the earth as a human being. Of course, Jesus has always existed as the eternal Son of God, but Adam was born as a human being a long time before Jesus was born as a human being. Okay, let's keep going. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. That's a reference to the creation of the first man, Adam, in Genesis chapter 2, from the dust of the earth. The second man is from heaven. That's the reference to the incarnation. Jesus came down from heaven to be born as a man. So their origins as humans are very different. Adam made out of the dust. Jesus descended from heaven. As was the man of dust, so also are those who are of the dust. In other words, you're humans like Adam is a human. Just as he was earthly, you are earthly. But as is the man of heaven, so also are those who are of heaven. Who are they? Are they angels? Who are the other heavenly ones apart from Jesus? And then this final punchline, which is so exciting. Just as we have borne the image of the man of dust, so we shall also bear the image of the man of heaven. So at the moment, we're all human, we're all Adam-like. But at the resurrection, we will all be Jesus-like. With his resurrection spiritual body, we will have resurrected, spirit-empowered physical bodies. So you can see the whole of the gospel is told through the parallel between these two men. And it's important that Jesus is a real person, and our hope of resurrection is based on his real body, just as Adam is a real person, and our understanding of who we are as humans is based on his real body. So the Bible assumes that Adam's historical. It really matters that Adam is historical. And I realized just with stupidly, I haven't put maybe the most obvious verse of all on the Bible. I've got almost every Adam verse in the Bible, but I've missed out the most obvious one, which is in Acts 17. You can add it yourself, where Paul says, from one man, God made every nation of mankind to inhabit the whole earth, which is also pretty explicit, I think, that there's a real Adam. So the Bible assumes it, and it's really important. And that's got to come first. And I think for a Christian, that's good enough for me. But it does create something of a headache, because we think, aren't we in a collision course with most of biology and genetics? And what do we do with that? So the last point is just a little bit of genetics. And if this goes over your head, then don't worry about it, because you probably don't care anyway. But if you are a biologist, then maybe this is your kind of moment. So I'll do my best to explain it to non-biologists, but it's kind of in unashamedly biological language. Okay, so a real historical Adam is scientifically plausible. First point, the question is, could you really get all of the genetic diversity of all the different ethnicities of the world just from two people? Okay, and the reason this seems kind of like a problem is because, you know, people say, oh, you look like your father. And I actually do, because he's also bald, and I've realized I've got the same face as him as I get older. And you probably look like your mother, and so on. But I don't look very much like Fiona's father, because he's ethnically Indian, or I don't look much like Claudia's father. He's ethnically Chinese. And so how can Adam and Eve give rise to someone who looks like Fiona, and someone who looks like Claudia, someone who looks like me? Right? I mean, if Adam and Eve are white, then their kids will be white. If they're Indian, their kids will be Indian. But how can they be white and Indian and black and Asian all at the same time? I mean, that's the problem we have. And I think the answer is it's possible that Adam and Eve were much more diverse than any of our parents were. Our parents have got a sort of limited gene pool, but Adam and Eve between them could represent all possible genes. So this is not how it is, but I imagine something like Adam was a short Indian man, and Eve was a really tall Caucasian woman, or something like that. I mean, it's not like that, but the point is that they're very, very different from each other. And so from their gene pool, you can get all possible human diversity. Now, just to explain that genetically, the DNA alphabet actually only has 4 letters in it. It's a very, very long book, your genome, but it's a book written with only 4 letters. And actually, if you go to the Wellcome Institute, when we're allowed to visit places like this, just opposite Euston Station on Euston Road, so it's a really cool science museum. They actually have a human genome. It's a book, it takes a whole bookcase, and there's loads of volumes, and you pull out one of the volumes and it's got loads of pages. It's like a telephone directory, and the font is really small. And it's just an example of one person's this is the DNA that represents an entire human being. And it's quite a cool thing to actually have printed out, which they have. And you'll see the whole thing is just 4 letters, C, G, A, and T, all in different orders. Now, you also probably know that the human DNA sequence comes as a helix, a double helix, where the 2 strands of the helix are paired. And I've shown that in the diagram on the right that I got from the internet. So every C is paired with a G, every A is paired with a T. And we both have 2 strands of DNA in each of our chromosomes. So that means 2 people have 4 strands. So between 2 people, you can get every single letter of the DNA alphabet, every possible letter at every possible place. So you can cram all possible genetic diversity into 2 people, basically. If you don't follow that, don't worry about it. But the point is, it's theoretically not a problem. Secondly, the idea of a DNA bottleneck in the human population, so the idea if we go back to just 2 people, actually fits really pretty well with other genetic evidence known as mitochondrial DNA. And if you don't know what mitochondrial DNA is, again, don't worry about it. But this is why you might have heard headlines in the newspapers about mitochondrial Eve. You know, could there have been a real human ancestor? And actually the genetics points to it. because of that mitochondrial DNA. And then the last question is, well, what about all these diagrams we see that you've got an ape and then you've got a human being and there's all these in-betweens. So this doesn't look like one human being. It looks like a gradual emergence of human beings from monkeys, you know, and there's all these intermediates. And I just encourage you to be a bit skeptical about some of those intermediates, because the classic diagram of the ape hunched over and the man standing up and all the different stages in between is actually just a picture by an artist. I mean, that's really all it is. It's not like we found all of these different things. It's just, it's an artist's impression of how you can go from one to the other with it. It's a bit like that face app where you can get two people's faces and then do all the different merges in between them. So, you know, you can turn yourself into Donald Trump and have a 50% Donald Trump and a 50% human and Andy Satch. And it's just that I mean, that person does not exist. There is not a half Trump, half Andrew, but you can draw one. So an artist just drew them. And occasionally people say that they found them. So we go, oh, we found Neanderthal man and he's like sort of 50% ape and he's 50% human. But again, that really does depend on what theory you're bringing to your data, because maybe that person actually is a human being, or maybe that animal really is an ape. It's very controversial to really prove that you found an intermediate, and the evidence isn't really there. Rather, it seems in the fossil record that human beings suddenly explode onto the scene. You get lots of things that look like apes, and then you suddenly get lots of animals that look like humans. And you don't really have the 50% halfway house that you want to find. And I've put some further reading. The first one is an excellent article by Mike Reeves about why Adam and Eve matter theologically. The second one is a study by my friend Richard Buggs, who's a professor of evolutionary biology, explaining why Adam and Eve make sense genetically. And he goes into quite a lot of detail. So probably only read that if you're a biologist, is my advice. And the last one is a Christian answer to the fossil record that says, don't be so sure that there's all these half man, half apes in between. Actually, the evidence seems to be lots of humans and then lots of apes and then separately lots of humans. So there we are. It matters. It's important theologically. It's plausible.